This is San Francisco.
Welcome to San Francisco, where the term #Girlboss was copyrighted by a, quote, ex-dumpster driver turned fast fashion serial entrepreneur who was briefly taken seriously within the never not sexist Silicon Valley circles and whom Forbes magazine once listed as richer than Beyonce. I am Toshio. I have a book coming out on January 31st, 2023, and it is called Miss Major Speaks, and it's with the Black trans icon, Ms. Major, and it's available now for pre-order anywhere you could buy a book online. Today, I am not alone. I'm with a friend and a co-host of another podcast we have together. It's called 2 Cents Plus Tax. Please welcome to the mic, Krystal Farmer.
Thank you. I've been trying to suppress my giggles every time you say something funny. So I'm like, okay, I hope I'm not ruining the intro. But yeah, no, thank you for having me. You already introduced me. I'm Krystal. I do the podcast 2 Cents Plus Tax with you and our mutual friend Caitlin, who is like your actual best friend for like a very long time.
Caitlin's listening.
I just recently sort of met on the internet and have become very friendly with. She's awesome. But yeah, no, thank you for having me. I don't really do anything else that people could check out. So yeah, just check out our podcast. It's very fun to do it. I really enjoyed having that outlet during the pandemic. So
on the podcast, we talk like pop culture and basically what we're into or not into, or sometimes for lack of inspiration, we'll talk about a random topic that I will have usually brainstormed like the night before. And
don't give away all our secrets, Toshio.
No. Yeah. That's a little fourth wall breaking.
Very prepared. We always come in. We have
It's
notes.
true.
No, we don't. We have nothing. But no, it's very fun. I do love, it's not really a format podcast. It doesn't have a specific format, really. We just kind of talk about whatever topic we're interested in talking about.
And somehow we have, enough words.
We have enough words, but also sometimes we just keep coming back to the same people and topics, even though we don't intend to. Like we have a recurring Madonna segment for some reason. I don't know why. None of us like really care that much about her, but
no.
For some reason she's always wiggling her way into our episodes.
Yeah, her PR agent. I hope that person is getting paid very well.
We should be getting paid, honestly. Like we're
on the street.
A lot of people
we're the street team. With this episode, again, it's #Girlboss is the topic. Krystal, the obvious question is, would you consider yourself a #Girlboss? But because I already know what you're going to say there, I will ask a less obvious question, which is, did you know that the term girlboss and its originator, Sophia Amuroso, according to the Trademark Office of the US of A, was born right here in the Bay Area?
So I knew about the term and I was very familiar with it, obviously, from being an online person, but I didn't know really about her Bay Area connections. I know that she had a business that was like located here, but I just assumed like all of the tech people who have wound up in the Bay Area that she was from somewhere else. So it was interesting to sort of look into her a little bit and learn that like, nope, she's totally local from Northern California, which I was like, oh man, now we have to claim her. So it was kind of a bummer. But yeah, the girl boss as like a term, very familiar with having been online and very familiar with the life cycle that it has had, because I think, we'll probably get into it, but when it started, it was kind of a positive term.
Right.
And now it very much has like a different connotation. So
I would have to agree there.
Yeah.
Like you said, Sophia Amuroso of #Girlboss. I keep saying hashtag, and at some
You
point I'll
have
need to
to.
drop it.
It's the
But
title of the book. You have
it
to
is
say
her
it.
memoir. Yeah, it's her
Mhm.
memoir, her Netflix show, etc.
Mhm.
So she was a hashtag California girl, Sophia, through and
Same.
through. Born in San Diego in '84, raised in Sacramento, our state's capital. And after hitchhiking up the West Coast and back, Sophia Amuroso settled in San Francisco just before founding Nasty Gal, a fast fashion company that made her very briefly more money than Beyonce, or at least that's a story we heard from her and from the press.
Was that okay? So I was going to say, was that something that she said about herself? Because I could totally see her saying that. Or I wonder if it was one of those like
It was a
Forbes
Forbes
magazine.
list,
Okay,
which
yeah.
Forbes magazine, I pretty much at this point, it exists to create lists
Yeah,
and
to tell us who's
for
richer than another rich person.
sure
So, yeah.
that, and yeah, for those rich people to feel, I guess, good about themselves for having made it to like 30 richest under
Congrats.
30 or what have
You
you.
nailed it.
Whether you believed in her valuation or not, it worked enough magic to where she was able to sell what would be a soon bankrupt Nasty Gal, the clothing company, to a bigger fast fashion conglomerate called Boohoo out of the UK. Perhaps people are familiar with them. They're kind of like ASOS
Okay.
or
So I wasn't sure. Do they own
Shein.
ASOS or they're just like a competitor? They're not
Yeah,
actually.
they're a competitor, and they're actually they're not doing too well. They're actually in a big greenwashing.
Oh
They've had
boy.
a big greenwashing scandal that I don't know we could get into later
I also think it's
involving
funny that
Kourtney Kardashian.
oh my God, why do they always get their fingers in everything? I think it's funny that she sold her company to another company called Boohoo because kind of like the way that she has before she sort of pivoted, after Nasty Gal, she kind of wanted people to feel sorry for her
Ooh,
situation
that is a good
in a
point.
way.
Yeah.
And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, sure, it probably sucks to lose a company that you built, but like, I mean, and I listened to the podcast about her memoir and I read a bunch of excerpts from it, but I'm kind of like, I don't know, man. If that's how you ran your company, you kind of maybe deserve to lose it. Like, I don't know. It feels
Mm-hmm.
you
Yeah,
know,
there's a good podcast
correct.
episode on Chelsea Devantez's podcast where she reads memoirs. She gets into Nasty Gal as well. And the memoir specifically, we'll link that in the show notes
Yeah, well, I'm sure we'll talk more about it later.
for sure. And so, in between selling Nasty Gal to Boohoo, in between, she was basically hailed in the corporate media as proof that Silicon Valley was becoming less sexist. Even though I would argue that a lot of what she did to get to where she was to kind of Lord of the Flies her way to the top, stepping over other women on the way up rather than necessarily helping them up.
I wonder
She
who she
did.
would be in Lord of the Flies. Which character? She certainly would not be Piggy. Like she would
No,
definitely.
not the first to go. And
Mm-mm.
actually, she's still around. She's still in the Bay. She's got podcasts. She is the perfect example of how, if you have enough money, if you have enough connections, a bankruptcy is just a little blip
Don't
on
give it away
your.
up front. Sure, we want
Yeah,
people
I
to
know, I
stay
know, I
under
know.
this.
Well, we know Boohoo entered
Mm-hmm.
the picture at some point. Next up, after she moved to San Francisco, she worked at Subway. She was a security guard at the Academy of Art University, or AAU, which is a redundant name for a school because you don't really need both academy and university in the name, but it is.
I never thought about that. That's really true.
Yeah.
But also AAU is confusing if you're a sports person like me because AAU is like the youth sports league. So if you know any kids that are really good at basketball, say there's like AAU basketball. If you pay attention to like the NBA, a bunch of NBA players will always talk about like, oh yeah, I knew this other player in the NBA when I was a kid because we both played on AAU. And it's like trying to imagine someone like a Sophia Amuroso like being in a sport like in AAU. It's like I
Yeah.
Can't
You
fathom
are
it.
a sports correspondent for
Yes,
sure.
exactly.
And, you know, if there was a sport that Sophia was involved in, I guess it was stepping over
It would be
other
blood sport. Yeah.
women on the way to the top, I
Mhm.
suppose. AAU, it's a con of a school, of an art school based here in SF that has a 100% acceptance rate. And it is the
And they
second
own like a lot
largest.
of property
Oh
too.
yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Second largest private landowner in SF after the Catholic
Hmm.
Church. You know, all of this stuff, the subway, the Academy of Art University, security guard job, the dumpster diving that is in her memoir ended up in a one season wonder Netflix series based on Amoruso's life. It is called, as you might have guessed, #Girlboss. And it
Ugh,
was a New York Times bestseller.
ugh.
Sophia and I have something in common, which is selling shit on eBay. And my eBay life kind of stalled after I was banned from Ulta Cosmetics. Someone at corporate at eBay found out I was buying and reselling a neck cream called Crepe Erase.
Okay, I have to pause you right here because that is one of the most bonkers stories I've heard. You've talked about this on 2 cents plus tax in the past, and every time I find out some new tidbit about your life in the past, I'm just like, who even is Toshio? Like, what is he getting up to? Because I just never would have imagined this, but also the specificity of like, not only did you don't have your eBay store, which hilarious that you had one. Secondly, you're banned from Ulta, not Sephora, not like some other, but Ulta. And third, that the specific product that you were reselling was a
Crepe
neck cream
Erase.
called Crepe Erase. I'm just
Yeah,
like,
it certainly was.
A, how do you
Yeah.
even find that niche? Like, it's just so, I'm like, only Toshio,
The
only Toshio.
secret is, well, you got to hustle in this modern day world. And I think it was on Love and Hip Hop. It wasn't
Oh
Cardi
my
B,
gosh.
but it was, you know, a lesser character that came out
Mm.
of Love and Hip Hop. Their like line that I remember was, "You got to have 7 hustles to be a millionaire."
Oh yeah, that's right. That's where that came
So that
from.
was one of 7 for a while, was selling this neck cream Crepe Erase on eBay.
Sounds exhausting, to be honest.
The hustle culture that Sophia and I embodied for so long, I
Hmm.
have to say that although she continues to promote that, she's like a business coach
Hmm.
part-time. She'll sell some time with her if you have business questions, or like she'll be on your board for some dollar amount. She's still hustling. I'm trying to do less of the hustling, as
Good,
a lot of us are, I believe.
good. Yeah, we need it.
For Amoruso, eBay is her startup founder's origin story. Just like all of the other tech titans have these kind of cliche founder stories. Maybe the most overused one is that of the Steve Jobses and Jeff Bezoses of the world, who talk about how they, you know, allegedly started Apple and Amazon with $1 a dream and some bootstraps out of their garages. And instead of garage, though, Amoruso was, you know, selling used clothes on eBay. In her case, so she was banned from eBay after her account was suspended. She got in a bunch of arguments with other sellers, as she admits in her memoir,
It's really
who
funny, like
reported
that
her.
she became so successful because it seems like at every step in the process, she was doing something to like sabotage. Like she's
Herself.
always like, yeah, exactly. She's always like, yeah, I had this great eBay store because I was really poor and like couldn't pay my rent. But then I like had to close it down because I was getting in fights with other sellers. And then I had like this, I turned it into a like brick and mortar like place where we shipped. But then like that also like went away because I was like
Right.
bad at didn't know spreadsheets and didn't know how
Yeah.
much like my company was worth or whatever. And it's just like every time, or I like, was really crappy to my employees, or she's always doing something that it seems like in a normal regular for a normal regular person, like that would be the end of the story,
Right.
right? Like that would be
Right.
it. But she just keeps on rolling just into
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
next
Yeah.
thing. Like it's just
Somehow, I don't know if it's like a lookist thing, because she's pretty
mm,
traditionally
yes,
like
yeah, yeah, yeah.
attractive woman, and in Silicon Valley, I don't know, maybe that goes like a long way, considering it is such a machismo
Not a lot of
sausage
women are
fest
in
or
there,
whatever.
yeah, doing their own thing and doing something like very big in that big way, unless they're already like attached to one of those other big companies, right? Like they're not
Right.
she's not a Sheryl Sandberg or anything.
Mm-hmm,
Like she's
mm-hmm.
like her own she's her own person, unfortunately. So,
Her
you
own
know,
brand of
yeah.
Girlboss, and I don't know if she actually came up with the term, who knows, but it is now a verb in most dictionaries. And so as she verbed her way to the top, she painted herself as an underdog, a freegan, a dumpster diver, a hitchhiking socialist. The show that was based on her life, that was weirdly executive produced by Charlize Theron.
I have a
Uh,
lot of opinions about who made that show, but we can get into it.
okay.
Yeah, yeah.
It depicted Sophia as rags to riches. You know, it was supposed to be like inspirational, aspirational, someone that we should all beg to learn at the feet of and aspire to become a sort of capitalist, second wave feminist monster, basically like Sophia. In other words, a girl boss.
Yeah, it's so funny that she's like, we should, I mean, in so many words, like beg at her feet to sort of learn from her, because the way she talks about like unhoused people and people who have like not very much money is so negative and condescending that
Uh-huh.
like if someone did literally beg her for something, they would probably not, she probably wouldn't react
Oh no.
positively, let's say.
But I mean, she garnered a lot of fans, as we said. You know, Charlize Theron ended up executive producing her show.
I thought that was I thought my eyes were, because I was watching it as I was like making dinner, and I was kind of like came in when the credits had started, and I was like, that did not say Charlize Theron like that. I'm sure that wasn't it. So I like rewound it and was like, nope, Charlize Theron put
Wow.
her name on this
Some
for some.
inspo for Charlize, as well as Lena Dunham, who blurbed her book saying, hashtag Girl Boss is more than a book. Hashtag Girl Boss is a movement.
I mean, she's not wrong, right? Like it did become that, but also like it did in a negative way. The connotation of girl boss now is something totally different than it was in like 2000 and whatever, 10 or whenever she
Yeah.
had written, or 14 or something like that. When she, no, it was before that when she wrote the book. But anyway, it has taken on a second life, which is still a movement, but it's not one you want to be associated with.
Right. And so back then, what would you have defined Girl Boss as?
Girl boss, a woman who is take charge, take no prisoners, kind of like going for what they want, whether it's like specifically in the business world or just generally in whatever it is that they're passionate about. I feel kind of icky about the girl of it all, like, you know,
Mm-hmm.
but again, that's a separate conversation, I guess. But also not really though, because like one of Sophia's kind of core tenets of her that she sort of puts forward in her book is like, don't grow up, never become like a boring old person. So it makes sense that she would have girl in the name of her like quote unquote feminist movement.
She's 38 and,
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
she's like around my age.
But
And
even
I,
when she
I don't know
started
if I
this, she
call
was
myself a
like
boy.
a boy
Yeah.
boss.
I don't think I would call, I wouldn't
I
refer to
think it's
myself as
redundant, right? Like in
maybe a
our
BOI.
oh yeah,
Um,
that's a good one because that's for anyone, right? Like you don't have to, yeah.
I'll
So
claim that one.
I like that. But yeah, I would say someone who's like passionate, going for what they want, who is determined. I guess maybe you don't have to be successful in the same way that she is, like strictly financially. I think probably she was trying to make it, like you're saying, like a lifestyle, right? Like
Confidence. Yeah,
not just
yeah,
necessarily like, oh, you have to have a business that makes a lot of money selling whatever, but that you have to have this, the confidence of someone who runs a business
for
making a
sure.
lot of money doing whatever.
Yeah.
Um,
And that's what you'll find, like the Girl Boss like blog, which is kind of like Gwyneth Paltrow has Goop,
oh boy.
and you know Oprah has her empire, and there's definitely like a girl boss girl out there apparently that's still into the concept enough that there is content being created in some kind of
I mean,
content
it's not
farm.
surprising though. I mean, we talked about this on our podcast about the show, Lindy West's show, Shrill.
Yeah.
And how there was an episode about kind of this specific thing, like this kind of woman who would, I think in 2010 or whatever, been described as a girl boss, where they like pay all this money to go to these conferences and hear people tell them like, you can do it and be empowerment. I think the episode's actually called like women empowerment or women's something like that. Yeah, I think it's still certainly a thing. I just think girl boss is not the like zeitgeisty term we have for it anymore.
You're right about that. Like the inspiration is still kind of a thing that people are seeking as, you know, the world is forever in shambles, it seems like. And there's always new people though, like Sophia, who are, you know, selling snake oil that is instant self-confidence according to them. And yeah, the movement, the lifestyle of it all. Later on, the end of the story is at this rally. She has a rally to launch her new company, a marketing company, and she calls it a rally. It seems like it's not. Well, we'll get into that.
Yeah.
I wouldn't call it a typical rally, but main takeaways that I got from reading the memoir is that young people are spoiled, want a trophy every time they accomplish anything. It's kind of how she treated her workers, who I checked out like some of the reviews from ex-employees on glassdoor.com where people can describe their experiences on the job. Let's see some cons included in the reviews. There was like a beautiful office, toxic atmosphere, long hours that went against California work laws, degrading and demoralizing management. I saw like maybe one pro that stuck out. You got a discount on cheaply made Forever 21 type BS.
Yeah, and that's what's so like interesting. I mean, first of all, the glass door of it all is really fun to have as like a snapshot, because so often in these kinds of situations where you have like these people who become titans of industry or whatever, like you don't really have the voices of the people that they kind of, I mean, for lack of a better word, like exploited, right, to get to where they are. But it's interesting now with the wake of social media and like sites like Glassdoor that sort of gather all of these people together to be able to say like, no, this is my experience. It doesn't have to be filtered through any kind of third party like interview, or I don't have to write my own book or whatever. I can just say whatever I feel on social media or right here in this Glassdoor post. So that's really interesting, because she never really, in the book anyway, right? She never really sort of is like, was I a bad person? Am I a bad person? Like, no, I'm just doing what I do. Yeah, exactly. It's just kind of like, nope, I'm just going forward. I'm like a shark. I'm never stopping, right? So it's interesting to have that as a little snapshot. But then also so much of because I also took a look at the Glassdoor reviews and stuff, but it's so funny that she tries to make herself out to be this like iconoclast or whatever.
Yeah.
But so much of the way people talk about working for her is how people talk about every single tech company that's here. Like it's all like, yeah, like they have a really beautiful space and they told us that we were going to have all these perks for like company products and whatever. But really they just kind of treated us all like garbage, and like we had to work weird hours that were super long or against the law or whatever, or we just had these like teams that were super demanding, or there's not really anything different about what she's doing, even though she would have you believe like, no, what I'm doing, it's like new and fresh, and I'm coming at it with this perspective of like girl boss hashtag yes all women kind of thing. And it's just like, I mean, but you're like not like, you're just replicating like what has already existed for many centuries.
No, totally. Yeah, I mean, she really was just doing what a lot of companies were doing in the mid 2010s. There's so many startups who were calling themselves kind of like the next Uber for insert, you know, idea here, product here, Uber for whatever. Like, you know, WeWork was the Uber for office space. So her company, Nasty Gal, was this Uber for fashion. It was a fast fashion
Mm-hmm.
clothing store. There were a few actual physical locations, but for the most part, it was an e-commerce website like, yeah, Shein or Fashion Nova. It was kind of like one of the earlier ones where you could kind of expect to get like a dress or a boot that looked like adjacent to something you might see off the runway, maybe with like a
Right.
vintage twist.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the employee on Glassdoor who referenced Forever 21, just like Forever 21 Nasty Gal was, getting into trouble with their copyrights. Designers rather were alleging that they were taking some of their designs from off the runway and just kind of creating a knockoff. And, in addition to that, as we know now, fast fashion is not a great thing for the earth.
It's not a great thing for the people who work there. It's not a great thing
it's
for,
really not. Yeah. So there's like a lot of things that Nasty Gal, she was definitely came to it and uses this alleged, socialist dumpster diving background and becomes one of those people who can use that and tell her potential investors during a pitch meeting for the startup, I used to be a socialist, but then I saw the light and now I'm like all for capitalism. I think that people in boardrooms love that kind of story.
Yeah.
And because there, again, are so few women in Silicon Valley, they've tried to do it, like, as you said, with, people like Sheryl Sandberg. They're always kind of like pushing them to the front. But that's like a rare person that ends up the top of these like CEO ladders.
Yeah.
So she pitched herself as this feminist brand, even though, underneath it was like the idea that we didn't really actually need feminism anymore.
Oh, boy.
The fact that Sophia could quote unquote make it in business was proof that feminism had accomplished everything it needed to. And that
isn't that always the way, like when the one person becomes successsul, we did it. So. We solved feminism. There's equality now. It's like, why?
The movement, we won. Absolutely. So we don't need to talk about feminism anymore.
No, we do not even need to use the word unless you're using it to say why you support what I want to do.
Right. So, yeah, exactly. It worked because those years it did have cachet. It was like leading up to Me Too. Again, Girlboss, it was so tied to capitalism and defining your worth as your work, and not much beyond that in my mind. The media ate it up, especially like the business trade magazines and blogs like Fortune magazine. They, in a profile of her, noted that if there's one real takeaway from Amoruso, it's that a prepackaged rulebook for business success no longer exists. And, that profile came out less than a year before her business went bankrupt.
It's just so funny because, again, I keep saying that everything's funny, but I obviously mean not funny. But it's just so interesting that they always say this. They're like, there's no rules. Everyone has the same, they have the same ability.
Playing field to start
exactly.
From.
The playing field is level. Everyone can be successful if they want to, because, now with the internet or whatever thing.
It's a great democratizer.
And it's like, it's still everything. Not true, right? Like there's still rules and steps that she followed to get to where she is, right? Like she had an online store and then that didn't work. So she was like, okay, brick and mortar, I got to do, like you're saying, start something that's e-commerce. So she had to get money, get a space, hire people. Like those are all rules. Like that's all like part of the process. Like none of this is outside of the like normal way that people like create a business. Because she was like young and attractive and a woman, they're like, well, all of this is different. And it's like,
this is brand new.
It's totally
never
the same
been done.
Thing. Like it's just so funny
because
it's similar to the whole Elizabeth Holmes nonsense that like everyone was so quick to buy into what she was selling because
for sure
they're like, well, a woman, like obviously she must be telling us the truth about the science that she knows. And she's not. She's really not. You guys don't have to fall for it every time. Like it's really funny to me.
And she had Kissinger on her board. I don't think Sophia had that name
She
on
didn't
her
have
board,
that
but
pull. That's true. I mean, she had, I think, well, I don't want to say she had a bigger legacy because of the, term girl boss, but Elizabeth had her own has made her own footprints, let's say.
yeah, I would say I would put them in the same box of
Mhm.
kind of scammers. One is gonna go to jail.
For a very long
Sophia
time.
is, yeah, out there in the world, somewhere nearby us, most
I
likely.
know. We should be careful.
Ooh.
I don't want to run into
Um,
her. Probably blog
yeah,
about it.
yeah. I mean, I think, this is like all the time, like 2014, 2015, when TED Talks, which are huge
Oh
within
boy.
the tech
Mhm.
community, they started to put out all of these talks. People pay $10,000 to go to a TED
Wait, does it
conference.
cost money to like be in the audience at a TED Talk?
Yeah, it's 10K to go, and then
What?
the rest of us pours if we really got to watch it, we got to wait for the thing
I
to drop
thought
later on.
this is blowing my mind. I thought they were like maybe they just like had tickets or they were part of like a conference or something that you paid, but it's just like, oh, you paid the money and then you get to
It
that
might
makes
even be
no
more than that at this point. That was
wow.
the ticket price like a few years ago.
Okay, this makes much more sense because I was always like, why are there always super prominent people in the audiences of these tech? Why would they
Uh-huh,
go to
uh-huh.
these? But you're like, oh, they paid to be there, and then obviously you see them on cat. Like, oh my gosh, I did not know that.
Yeah, I mean, this was the time when TED Talks, like, there were so many that came out that embodied what Sophia's trajectory was, which was
Mm,
to repackage something that already existed. And then the thing flops because it's just based on venture capital money that eventually runs out. And in
right.
this case, ran out over like a very short amount of time, a couple of years. I think a lot of the TED Talks apply here in that Sophia continues to be like a business consultant. And the TED Talks around the time were like, they were all about the idea of the art of failure. I don't
Mm.
know if you remember any of these, but like there were so many in this vein. And to the point that TED Talk, their website has a whole section on the art of failure.
Oh my
Some of
gosh.
the titles are, well, would you mind reading the
Yeah. So they have titles like We Should Aim for Perfection and Stop Fearing Failure, The Lost Art of Losing. Okay. And then the last one is the worst, in my opinion. Don't fail fast, fail mindfully. I was like, what does that even mean? Like, I
I
don't, yeah.
know. Yeah, it really gets me nostalgic for 2005 when another movement, I mean, all these things that are just repackagings
Yeah.
of other things that are said to be like, oh, this big light bulb, this big idea that is going to change the world. Slowing down was a big thing at the time. I would say,
Mhm.
I guess in this case, Sophia's doing the opposite. Is she's like doing things as fast as possible with the fast fashion company.
Mhm.
But at the same time, you had people that were around her, like business partners with her, funding her company, talking about the slow food movement, the slow parenting movement, slow
Mhm.
fashion. Maybe not slow fashion. I don't. Her company is very
Well,
at
she's a part
odds
of
with
it,
that
but
idea.
it makes me sort of think. I mean, again, I was not, I was definitely not an investor in 2005. Never gonna be that. But it makes a little more sense, I think, if like you sort of consider the context of like where kind of investing was, if that was kind of the new hot thing that people were considering, and then here's this, or had been considering for some time, and then here's this person who's like, nope, I did all this super fast, built this company super fast, and we do fast fashion and all that stuff. You can kind of like get why people might be intrigued by that and might be like,
Yeah,
oh, maybe we were wrong, maybe we don't need to pay so much attention to doing things slowly, right?
yeah, because it's
So
not making as much money necessarily,
exactly. She could do
except
this in
for,
for
yeah,
many
like,
years. She could take like 5 years to build this giant company and be worth however many millions of dollars, that maybe they're like, no, we had it right the first time. Let's
yeah,
just
no, this is the time like when Amazon Prime, comes along, people want
Mhm.
their shit like
In
next
2 hours.
day.
Yeah.
And Nasty Gal made that possible. again, going back to the employment of her people that she hired, in some cases, like she would use people that worked for her as in like the administration of the company or at some of her stores to model her clothes, and they would get paid far less than the hired professional models. And a lot of those people that were paid much less, they were paid their daily salaried rate or their hourly rate. They tended to be Black, of course. I also find it sus that her original eBay store had been called Nasty Gal. Also, it was a reference to the disco queen Betty Davis. And Betty Davis is someone who never really got recognized for her talent. And I think it's kind of sad that now when you Google Nasty Gal, instead of finding out about this treasure trove of music that Betty Davis, who's like kind of more, I guess, well known as the wife of Miles Davis. Now when you Google Nasty Gal, you're only going to find like Nasty Gal reference to the fast fashion brand of Sophia Amuroso.
It's like always the way though, right? Because like anytime there's a phrase or a word that Black people have coined or, use amongst the in-group, whenever white people sort of get exposed to it or think it's interesting, Black people lose ownership, right? Like woke, nasty gal, YOLO, bling, like all of these things, like you Google them and you never are like, oh yeah, that person totally coined that phrase. Even Me Too, right? Like that was a Black woman had started a movement,
Burke,
an org, Tarana Burke, and then it was co-opted by the Time's Up people who were like, this is the name, this is the hashtag we're using. And she's like, already did that. It's just a series of things that like just regularly happens whenever, Black people have a term and they're like, someone comes in and Columbuses it. And they're like, hey, have you heard about this term, Nasty Gal? Isn't this a fun name from my company? And again, not giving Betty Davis the credit that she deserves. So
for sure. Yeah, I guess we can take a little comfort, although it's not too much cover, but at some point, Sophia Amuroso was quite embarrassed because within a year of her making this richest self-made women list in Forbes, where she was one of the youngest members, she'd made her debut with an estimated net worth of 280 million. And it was based on the assumed value of her majority stake in the company, which, that's you could do a whole episode about like these valuations that are based on
also I hate that I even know that word. Like just
right.
living here in the Bay Area during this time, I'm like, why do I have to know what valuation is? Like I don't need to know that, but it's just like, it's everywhere. It's just interesting, the whole like valuation and like, all of that sort of
come from.
It's an intriguing sort of aspect to like the business, to business generally speaking, like how someone determines or how people determine what your company is worth. But it's also really interesting to see the negative effect of that because you don't often hear about it unless like as a company like this where it goes belly up. But so rarely do people like care.
Like
but
how
this
are
was one
you
time where people cared a lot.
Yeah, like how are you allegedly more wealthy than Beyonce? Like
I
one
know,
day and then like the next, by the next Forbes magazine.
Yeah, it's truly all like smoke and mirror, like a bubble. Like it's not real money. The way someone like a Beyonce would have real money, right? She's been in the music industry for like at this point like 20 years and she had been very successful for pretty much the entire time,
right?
So like, okay, you can probably guess that she would actually have millions of dollars like in the bank, in resources and assets and stuff. Yeah, someone who just built a company like 5 years ago, she probably doesn't have like millions of assets that she could like, or millions of dollars in assets that she could like liquidate. So saying that she's worth X amount of money is like not terribly like fair or accurate.
Like I mean, Boohoo in the end, Boohoo, the company that bought Nasty Gal, it was buying the brand, it was buying just the concept, I guess, behind it still had some cachet. They thought for the UK audience, it still exists out there. It's not a profitable part of Boohoo. the other thing, like connecting this back to the art of failure and how you need to fail mindfully. I mean, I guess Sophia accomplished that, as Forbes put it. Founder and charismatic face of the company, Amoruso, 32 at the time, was on stage at Sydney, Australia's Business Chicks conference as the news broke of her bankruptcy. Quote, it was my first business, and I got really far. Filing for bankruptcy is actually the most responsible decision for the business, she tearfully told the crowd. And henceforth was no longer on the Forbes list, and Forbes kind of had to they had to take responsibility for writing this BS based on these valuations that they just took at face value, which is how a lot of the business press kind of operates anyways.
It's so weird too also that this seems to happen a lot. They'll have these lists that they'll put out and they'll say like, oh, this person's worth X amount of money, and then like whatever 3 or 4 years later to be like, actually they're only worth this amount, like
right. And a lot of times you don't hear about the follow-up, but in this case she had made herself into such a public figure within Silicon Valley that
first number is what sticks.
So she was, and even in Australia apparently she was keynoting the Business Chicks conference. So
can we talk about that name? Like, what is that name of a conference? Business Chicks is like, was there like a wet t-shirt contest?
I mean,
part of it, like
it's very 2014. Even, all of this, like
1984. It's very like what even? I don't know.
Right.
Although it's Australia, they just do things differently down there, I guess.
Maybe it has a different connotation down there.
I don't know, man. I think probably chicks still means chicks.
I mean, at the end of the day, though, like Sophia Amuroso, like bankruptcy or not, she could go out on these shaky limbs in business and not worry about it too much. I mean, she's white. She really didn't need to be dumpster diving. Her family was 90 minutes away. They could bail her out of pretty much any financial situation. In the end, she was just another one of these Silicon Valley, at first success, but then later bigger failure. She moved fast, embracing the hypercapitalism and the Silicon Valley startup kind of way. She had already left when the bankruptcy was filed, so good for her. She
not suspicious at all.
Yeah, she probably saw it coming, and maybe nobody else, or not nobody else, but there were probably a lot of people around, including Forbes, who saw these other things happening, like the books coming out, and because she had multiple books, and the show coming up on Netflix, and saw this trajectory as moving forward. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, it was kind of like smoke and mirrors.
Yeah.
And today she's, continues to, again, can hire her as a business coach. She's got podcasts on business. Cannot imagine her having other advice than really like be born as this non-disabled white woman with safety net of generational wealth. At her Girlboss rally speech, which was to launch her next venture, which is basically a marketing company, she left everyone at her keynote speech with the advice: success is not a straight line. If you've been paying attention in the last year, my line has squirreled in every direction and it's in a knot now. I'm still figuring it out, and I hope I never figure it out.
Oh, aren't you lucky, Sophia, to never have to?
I know.
It's frustrating. It's so okay. So many things I'm thinking. So the part that I was sort of like focused in on when you were talking about how she, used her background a lot. This is a thing that's really common. I mean, you talked earlier about like how Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates and even Steve Jobs have these like stories about how they built their companies from nothing or whatever.
Yeah.
But they always leave out the fact that they are comfortable, like financially comfortable, if not wealthy, right? Like everyone's like, oh, Jeff Bezos, he built Amazon out of his garage. Also, his parents gave him $300,000 or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, okay, if your parents have the means to give you $300,000, probably you would be able to build a business, maybe it won't be it might not be as successful as Amazon, but you could probably do something with it. Like that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And even if you don't have parents that would give you $300,000, like you have a safety net, right? Like you can go home to your family, especially if they're like, yeah, you don't have to be doing this, which it seems like her parent, I mean, if the show was any indication, her family was like not super into her like boho existence. Like prior to her starting that company, they were like, why don't you like get a real job and like an apartment and like, eat real food, don't dive in the dumpster to like get it or whatever. She sort of makes it seem like, yeah, I had this real rootless kind of like freewheeling experience because like that's kind of what she had to do, but like that was her choice. Like she chose to live like that lifestyle, and now she's trying to use it as like, and it gave me the tools to do what I do in business. And it's like, I mean, it didn't. Like you made so many mistakes, and that's why you don't have your first company anymore. Like it's just very it's very sort of wanting to have it both ways, wanting to have your cake and eat it too.
Well, I think we should get into the show because they actually do talk or rather they depict a relationship that she has with her dad. And it's pretty clear. I mean, she just comes off as all the more like petulant and entitled
my God.
for being able to like call on her dad and deciding, no, I want to show my dad that I can make it out there because I'm a dreamer.
Oh my gosh, that
dreamer with a lot of generational wealth. So yeah, we'll discuss that in a minute on the behind the Patreon wall episode. With that, I just want to say thank you again to Krystal. Can't wait to have you back.
Yeah, definitely.
And be talking to you soon over on 2 cents plus tax.
Yeah, you'll hear from me otherwise. I mean, listeners, you should also hear from me. But yes, you and I, we will be seeing each other.
This and every episode of Sad Francisco was produced by Caitlin Wood, the other 2 cents plus tax co-host, as well as me, Toshio Moronic. If you can, please help us out by going to sadfrancis.co, where you can contribute toward the editing and transcriptions of the show. In exchange, you'll get bonus episodes plus more. Again, that's sadfrancis.co, sadfrancis.co, and we will see you soon.
Bye.